Boom shanka shakalaka. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great privilege to be the first voice on the very first episode of the new podcast, Learning to Die, with my co-host, the quarrelsome life man, the lunatic himself, Mr. Ciaran O'Regan. How are we doing?
Good, man.
Awesome.
Excited about this.
It's good, isn't it? I'm looking forward to it, but as with everything, we go on tangents. So we should have recorded all the tangents over the last 2 or 3 years, and we would have had 500 hours of content to put out.
Yeah, but I think of any topic, there's something quite focusing about death. So of anything that's likely to keep us on point, it's the reality of mortality.
Reality of mortality, yes, because the destination is where we're all heading, isn't
it? Yeah, destination known, it seems.
It reminds me of the song by The Doors, or the lyrics, 5 to 1, baby, 1 in 5. No one here gets out alive. I'll get yours, baby. I'll get mine. Gonna make it, baby, if we try. Get together one more time. Get together one more time. Anyway, look that up. Okay. See, this is going to be the backbone of this podcast. Fucking about, really. So my name is Ian Dunican, and I am joined by my co-host Ciaran O'Regan. Ciaran, before we get in and talk about the purpose of the podcast, do you want to give people just a few minutes of an introduction and a background to you? And for those of you watching on YouTube, I will share Ciaran's website as well, so you can have a look at the beautiful Ciaran in action as well, so as Ciaran talks along.
So as you can see, that's my arse there. And the left, and that's me there on the right feeding a donkey, and a nice island off the coast of West Cork. Background, okay. In summary, I suppose I go backwards from where I am now. Is I'm based in Cork in Ireland, and I'm originally from Limerick. I've been living in Cork 4 or 5 years in total between 2 different occasions. I work as a strength and conditioning coach and kind of performance coach, and I help fighters make weight for fights. Work with teams mostly at the moment. Education-wise, I'm a sports scientist, started a professional doctorate a couple of years ago, had to put that on hold because of the whole global pandemic thing. That's been a bit of an inconvenience, to say the least, but as far as things go, I didn't do too bad during it. Basically, yeah, and I have for a good while now, I've had an interest in areas of philosophy and psychology way above my intellectual pay grade, but that I can't help but think about and try and navigate. So yeah, I like writing things and doing various podcasts, and I'm kind of a generalist across a load of different domains, but a lot of it comes back to basically big questions: how to live, given the fact that I know we must die, essentially. What it keeps coming back to. And death contemplation has been something that's been a major part of my life for years. And I don't know, since 2013 or 14. And as an actual tool in the toolbox of enhancing gratitude and providing perspective, it's been absolutely invaluable. So when the opportunity to have a podcast or do a podcast specifically on around the topic of death and dying and what to do about the meantime and do during the meantime, I with a fellow generalist goon like Ian here, I jumped at the opportunity. So yeah, that's a kind of a mile high overview for myself, I think. And yeah, I'm looking forward to going into these topics because at bare minimum, worst case scenario is we end up exploring ideas that are, I think from all my efforts so far, we just go deeper and deeper on ideas that are life enhancing, and which it sounds paradoxical given the fact that they're going to be focused around death. And at best, we'll explore those ideas and learn something ourselves, and also be able to cast out pebbles that will be of use to others as well. And it always feels nice to be able to contribute towards something. So worst case scenario, we have the crack, learn some things, wrestle with some difficult and uncomfortable ideas, and come out the other side of it. Which, who knows how we'll come out the other side of it. Maybe we'll come out the other side of it hanging from a tree at some point. But given our past experiences and exposures to these topics, I don't have any reason to think that going further down this rabbit hole, and given the fact that it's been life enhancing so far, and that the resistance encountered in these difficult topics and difficult discussions has been life enhancing for me so far. Not easy, but life enhancing.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing what kind of realizations we come to and what we learn from each other. And as I said, icing on the cake would be if the ideas that we grapple with and the questions we try and seek answers for, if those strivings end up being of use to other people as well, then that's some really nice icing on the cake for what will otherwise, I'd imagine, it's got to be a really enjoyable enterprise. So
yeah,
that's where I'm coming from. What about yourself, man?
I think that's great. Yeah. And so like yourself, I think, you know, I've always been interested in philosophy and psychology, although not qualified in that area. And like you said, way above my pay grade, and I'm not an expert in this area. And I think it's important to realize that we're not going to take a purely academic approach on this. Our academic backgrounds are in science and engineering. So that's the kind of people we are, and very performance based. We both have backgrounds in athletics and in sort of martial arts predominantly, and rugby and stuff like that. But we're not coming into this to break it down and pick apart, you know, these kind of academic type questions or talk about references. We're here to look at the ideas. We're here to break down the ideas. And it's really from our perspective what we get over. And for anybody that reads philosophy or psychology or history or sociology interested in these topics, you may have found the same yourself, where you read a chapter of a book and you get something out of it, and then you go back and you might reread a passage again the next day and you get something out of it again. So it's actually about time as well, you know, and when you sample it. So for me, this is about personal growth. It's about talking about these ideas. I think it's great that we can do that in society today. And, you know, I think too often when we don't talk about these complex or difficult issues, that's where conflict occurs. So the more we can talk about these things and come to common ground, the better. And I'm sure we'll have some disagreements along the way, but that's good. That's what we need to have. We'll also have some touch points as well. In terms of my background, I'm from Athlone originally in Ireland, but I'm actually based here in Western Australia. I've been here for nearly 20 years now. And so Ciaran and I got talking. I've been talking for numerous years now, a number of years, about sort of sleep and performance stuff, which is my background. And we decided to launch this podcast. But I started off in the military originally, did a few years there, came to Australia, worked in health and safety and mining, ended up getting into sleep and performance type work. My undergrad is in education. My postgrad qualifications are in science, particularly on sleep science, mining engineering and business. And I did a PhD then in sleep and performance, which you can see on these banners here behind me. I got Sleep for Performance, where I work with athletes. I currently work in Formula One and Major League Baseball. That's my current clients. But I've worked in rugby, baseball, basketball, swimming, a range of sports around sleep. And then we have Melia's Consulting, which is focused on industry around shift work and health and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I am. So I'd have a hybrid approach of consulting and research that I do now for clients based out of Western Australia. And yeah, obviously with that as well, I find as I get older, more interested in these bigger questions or philosophy or why we're doing things. And I find that some of the philosophy that we discuss, Ciaran, on separate calls actually applies to athletes. Stoicism, Buddhism, Taoism, those type of things that could be classified as religions nearly as well. Lots of those principles hold true for athletes as well. So like yourself, I'm just here to have a chat, learn, have a bit of a laugh, take the piss on myself, take the piss on you, and hopefully we can get some good content out to people as well, and maybe get some people talking about this. So if one person listens and gets some value, I'll be happy. If no one listens, like you said, we'll have to crack and we'll be helping each other. So it's all good with me.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, is that the types of philosophy that it seems we've both resonated with and been drawn to aren't the kind of branches of philosophy or schools of philosophy or philosophical writers or thinkers that seem to partake in philosophy for its own sake. Like, the things that we seem to have been drawn to both are the aspects of these different philosophical traditions that are legitimately practically applicable in living. Like, it's figuring out how to use these aspects of philosophical insight to improve our daily functioning, approach to life, orientations in life. And it's not that there's a perfect way to live, but it's pretty obvious that we seem to spend our time as humans, like part of the human condition is orientating away from states of experience or experiential states that we'd rather not have more of, and orientating towards what we'd like to have more of. So it's like orientating away from suffering and toward whatever is not suffering. And that seems to be the inbuilt orientation that we have. And philosophy is a way maybe that I've found these practical schools of philosophy, like a lot of the work from a lot of Stoicism, aspects of Zen and bits of Taoism that I'm familiar with, provide these really powerful insights that, and other aspects like Carl Jung and Ernest Becker, who we're going to end up discussing, these insights in here that are useful in a way of finding pathways that are more robust in terms of orientating away from suffering and toward what's not that. And
Ciaran, let me ask you a question there, Ciaran, on that word suffering, because this is a word that gets thrown around a lot in Buddhism as well, or people want to avoid suffering, and kind of human condition is to avoid suffering. Like, we're very good humans at being optimal laziness, I call it, right? So we're very good at like doing the least amount of stuff, from hunter and gatherers to the, where we can order groceries online right to the door. Like, I got groceries delivered last week for the first time, right? Because I just always go to the shop, but I was mental busy with some stuff. I wasn't feeling well. I thought I'll just get them delivered to the house. And I thought, how crazy is this? I can sit here like a fat fool at home, watching baseball, not feeling great, having a few days off, and a guy can drive. It's only like a kilometer to the supermarket. But because I wasn't feeling good, and with the whole flu thing and all that going on, and, staying away and coronavirus, I thought I'll just get them delivered. And I thought, how crazy. I can click a button here. I don't even have to go to the door. They actually said on the thing, we'll ring the doorbell once and walk away. You don't even have to interact with us. Like, it's just like a minimal amount of effort as humans compared to what we were like a hunter and gatherers. And so we're very good at, getting away from any of that suffering, even the suffering of going to the shop, Now, in other days, I probably would have went to the shop, but, I didn't want to be there coughing and sneezing on people and, looking like death, because then you get shot these days for that, or dragged off to the gulags, or someone will stick a mask on you or inject you. But anyway, I'm going to come back to it. See, I ramble again. Suffering. How do you describe suffering, Ciaran, in your words? What is suffering?
This is again one of the deepest of deep things to even contemplate, because you can put it in. So a way of thinking about it is, I think this might be something I came across Sam Harris describing it before, where imagine the kind of pain that we'd experience in extremely intense exercise, where there's pain and the muscles are burning or the legs are burning, but the frame of reference that we have in that experience is that we're voluntarily doing it. We know we can quit at any time. If we really wanted to, you could just stop running. or whatever, if you really decided that for whatever your motivations or incentives for being there were, just didn't justify that discomfort, you can always slow down. But then if you think about those exact same physiological sensations of discomfort could be occurring when you wake up some morning, all of a sudden you just feel like that. But because there's no awareness of why it's happening or what it's there for, and no frame of reference, and it's not voluntarily encountered, now all of a sudden that could be a very different interpretation. So it's the same neurological, let's say, input and pain stimulus, but it's a totally different lens through which you're interpreting it. And so then where do we use the word suffering? And then when you have people like that Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc, the anniversary of which is coming up soon, actually, of the burning monk, and it was 11th or 12th of June 1963, and he's the Mahayana Buddhist monk that, in protest of persecution of the Buddhists by the Catholic minority government in Vietnam at the time, he had his mate pour jet fuel all over him, and he gave a few words, left a letter, and then lit himself up, or had his mate light him up, and he sat there in what seemed to be total tranquility and peace while he burned to death with jet fuel. And an American New York Times, or he was a New York Times reporter, an Associated Press reporter, was there and wrote that he didn't twitch a muscle, didn't utter a sound, didn't show any sign of discomfort, and that's what do we do then with this idea that someone like that may very well have illustrated that the most intense pain maybe imaginable to a human can be collapsed into a state of tranquility and peace. So there's an almost troubling nature to that, because then it almost facilitates a kind of there's a dark side, there's a bright side to it, because it shows the potential of human consciousness, and then the dark side being almost this, if you extrapolate it out, it could almost be a way of neglecting the pain and suffering, pain inflicted upon other people, because it almost kind of devalues what pain is and what it could be. So but in terms of suffering, I think if I just think of it in terms of states, on a very simple level, it's states that you try and move away from, and whatever is not suffering, you could think of is different Greek words like happiness or whatever. Is like, there's a Greek word hedonia, which is the kind of etymological root for hedonism, which is kind of like pleasure.
Hedonic,
yeah. And then there's eudaimonia, which is another Greek word, an Aristotelian word that's like more relates to meaning or purpose, let's say, where one of them is more kind of shallow and fleeting, the hedonic. And it's not that hedonism is bad, like, but it's that it's not going to be as satiating. It's almost like hedonism you could think of as like ice cream. There's nothing bad with ice cream, but ice cream isn't meat and veg. You know, they're different. They're going to have different effects over the long haul. If you have just a life based on ice cream versus a life based on meat and veg, whereas if you have a life based on meat and veg and you have some ice cream, there's going to be very little harm there. You know, so it's a kind of a long way around of putting it that. But then you think about states that we'd rather orientate away from. And then you think about the things, especially that you've done with the ultra running, and I've had glimpses of with my own competitive experiences with fighting and this training that I still continue to do, where we voluntarily lean into resistance and voluntarily lean into physical discomfort as a way of learning about ourselves, as a way of managing the monkey mind, as a way of like knowing in advance, getting butterflies even, that this is going to be so fucking hard, what I've got planned, what I'm about to do. But that's why I'm going to fucking do it. And that in itself is, well, can we call that suffering, even though there are states we'd rather not, parts of us at least would rather not partake in. So then it's hard to put it, whereas if you actually just use a historical example and you just take something like the gulags, like you'd mentioned, or the concentration camps, and you go, well, all right, if anything is bad in the world, that's bad. So if bad is a thing, then that's it. You know, it's like the Holodomor man-made famines in the Ukraine because of the Stalinist the communist, the kind of mad economic policies and the kind of Red Scare stuff and the man-made famines, the cannibalism that went on by the Chinese Red Guard, where the primary school kids eating their teachers for being anti-communist, the Nazi concentration camp genocide of the Jews. These are bad things that you can say, okay, if human suffering exists, these are pretty useful historical examples to illustrate what it might be, in spite of the fact that there are people like a Thich Quang Duc that can seemingly collapse all pain and what you'd imagine would be suffering into a state of tranquility and seeming bliss. So in spite of the fact that that's possible, suffering can still exist at the needless, inescapable discomfort that's not voluntary. In spite of the fact that we might lean into this physical discomfort through martial arts and through just physical feats that parts of us don't want to do, but other parts know are more like meat and veg on the other side of it, then still that's voluntary. It's not imposed upon us with a gun to our head. That's like, so it's really hard to define it and to nail it down, but that's how I kind of think about it as like a big picture view. It's almost like there's a paradox in there where seemingly at one side the human mind is capable of collapsing it into what seems to be tranquility, all states of conscious experience. But on the other side, I'd much rather live in a world where concentration camps and gulags and torture and that kind of crack that went on, and it still goes on in much of the world in different parts. Was it happening much less? Ideally, not at all. So I don't really know how to reconcile those two.
Yeah, and I think like over the episodes, we'll get into this kind of yin and yang. We'll talk about energy, we'll talk about karma, we'll talk about balance, we'll talk about the good and the bad, or the ice cream and the meat and veg. I like that, It's like meat and veg and ice cream. That might be the two words we'll put in the new yin and yang symbol, Show a bit of balance. But a few things there, Ciaran, I think that actually fits nicely into the theme of this podcast. This podcast, as I said, is going to be focused on things like philosophy, psychology, history, sociology, those type of areas, culture. They're the main areas that we will focus on as part of the podcast. And just to give people a bit of an outline as well, we will release episodes where we will break down a topic or a book, and that could be in an episode or over multiple episodes where we'll do that. So we will generally see like maybe somewhere between 1 to 5 episodes being released in a kind of a block for you to go through at your pleasure on a specific topic, such as the Book of Five Rings, Ernest Becker, Denial of Death, and so on. So we will be delving into those topics in more detail. I think with the suffering part and how it ties back to the podcast, Learning to Die is regardless of those types of suffering that you explained there, you're going to have suffering in your life. Nobody's devoid of suffering. Even the super rich to the super poor have some sort of suffering that's relative to them in their life. And so it's about dealing with that suffering, embracing that suck, as they say, putting your head down, biting down in your mouthpiece and going through it. Because shitty things happen, shitty days occur. But like Bruce Lee said, it's only temporary. Things will pass, And so we got to kind of use these tools, I think, from philosophy and psychology to bite down our mouthpiece, grind through it and improve. The key is, how can we use it? How can we improve? How can we be better? And how can we keep going? Because I think, you and I probably come to the same conclusion as well. You can't just sit on your couch and expect everything to be perfect. You have to get up, you have to embrace the suck, and you have to do hard, shitty things to make improvements. No one ever gets great at doing crappy things. Like in my work, I've got the great, and you're the same as well, Ciaran. I've had the great privilege of dealing with some, world-class athletes, like world-class. Those people aren't sitting on the couch and someone's giving them opportunities. They're up working their arse off every day. Yes, they've got some inherent skill, they've got some inherent talent, but they're working their arse off, right, to get there. That's suffering in another way as well. That's going out there day after day, or like you said, with some of the events that we've done. Martial arts, long distance running, long distance swimming, day after day. Someone said to me before Christmas, "Oh, can't believe you swam to an island like 20 k's away. How'd you do that?" I went, "Easy, I fucking trained. Spent like over a year training for it." So when you were sitting in bed scratching your nuts at 4:30 in the morning, I was getting up to go swim 4Ks in the morning. I was getting up on a Saturday morning to swim 6Ks. I was swimming 25Ks a week. I was doing X, Y, and Z. You embrace that stuff and you lean into it, like you said. So hopefully we can get some of those things out of the topics that we discuss, you know, coming up. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I love that. There's that. And these are the topics that this kind of sentiment of recognizing that the way over the top is to go underneath, you know, that kind of Ubermensch, the Nietzschean kind of Ubermensch essence of like
Superman.
You know, yeah, this kind of idea, because one of my favorite lines in the Just Spoke Zarathustra is along the lines of that. It's like Jung paraphrased it at one point, where Jung paraphrased, I believe it was Jung paraphrasing Nietzsche when he said it, that the branches can only reach to heaven if the roots reach to hell. And that the more you strive upwards towards the brightness, towards the lightness, the more you have to strive downwards towards the darkness. And that this awareness that like there's another Thomas Hardy line that's a really similar, I come across recently in a book called Staring at the Sun. It's about death anxiety. It's written by the psychotherapist Irvin Yalom. And he said that if a way to the better there be, it must involve a look at the worst. And that's another way of putting it, that it also in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, in terms of the essence of this resistance, Nietzsche has this concept of the three metamorphoses that has some beautiful symbology in it. That's got to do with, it's basically the spirit. But the three metamorphoses are spirit to camel, camel to lion, and lion to baby, which sounds bizarre. Like what the fuck is this about? These changes. Well, it's like the way that the symbology is essentially lays itself out is the first metamorphosis is that when the spirit voluntarily demands the highest load possible, it turns into a camel and runs off into the desert. So think about that as like choosing to bear the heaviest load you can imagine, then heading out into the desert. So going out by yourself to the place that's sparse of resources and scary and empty of assistance and empty of life. But then when the camel goes out into the desert, the camel encounters a dragon. But then because the camel went out there voluntarily, the camel turns into a lion. The lion then, because there's a capability to defeat the thing that scares you the most in the place you don't want to go, then the lion, after defeating the dragon, turns into a baby, because the baby is the symbolic representation of potential and an opening onto the future, and an opening on to new possibilities, and an opening on to new learnings, and a regrowth, a kind of a regrowth, a reborn kind of symbol, a symbol of the reborn, of the perpetuation of the life force towards something new, you know, like that kind of symbology of voluntarily carrying load, voluntarily seeking resistance, going to places we don't want to go to, facing what causes fears or anxieties. And this is what Nietzsche gets criticized about, is there's a kind of a ridiculous, kind of a shallow understanding of the Ubermensch, as if it's something got to do with being superior to other people in an egotistical sense. Whereas throughout the Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he specifically takes the piss out of people who think that they're superior to others just because they've learned some aspects of themselves. Like he says that they're like, there's one aspect of it where he says that they're rich in torn garments, which is that like they think people that think of themselves as special just because they've had these struggles that makes them superior to others because they've happened to overcome them. So he kind of, within it, he even takes the piss with this idea of being superior to others, and he prioritizes this idea of self-overcoming. Like the Ubermensch is kind of like this, it's almost like a secular Western Buddhist enlightenment, kind of a concept, this kind of glimpseable ideal that's this self-overcoming integration, full acceptance of the self, leaning into the resistance, leaning into fears, being in a place of total contentment and a lightness of self that results as a result of having gone through that process of seeking what we most need to find in the places we least want to go. And those places are, like the Buddha said in the Dhammapada somewhere, he said that, like, you know, it's essentially, it's kind of like 500 years before the Christ said the same thing, where the Buddha says, like, before you try and straighten out the crooked, do the harder thing and straighten out yourself.
Wait now. That sounds a bit like Jordan Peterson to me, about cleaning up your own room before you want to go out and save the world.
Yeah, but it was Jordan Peterson. So the kind of timeline was, the Buddha was at it about 500 BC, and then the Christ says it about, you know, whenever the Christ was around, says that, you know, before you point out the splinter in someone else's eye, take care of the log in your own.
Yes.
And then about 1,000 years after that, Rumi, who's a Sufi mystic, said something along the lines of, yesterday I was clever, so I tried to change the world, but today I'm wise, so I tried to change myself. And then the Gandhi says that, Gandhi says that then in the 1900s, he says, like, be the change you'd like to see in the world. And then in 2018, Mr. Jordan Peterson says it then along, just reiterates the same sentiment as, like, what does he call it? Like, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, as one of the
He even
rules.
goes one before that, and he says, put your room before you do your house, your room.
Yeah. That's what he starts. But that's the name of the rule in the book itself, in his actual 12 rules for life. The rule is set your house in perfect order. Or it might be room, actually, or it might be right. But regardless, it's the same sentiment. It's because, and that's where I like that picture. That's class.
Good, isn't it? The old Ubermensch there, yeah. That's the precursor to Superman. So if anybody's out there watching Superman, this is where the Superman cartoon came from, really, was the Ubermensch with Nietzsche. So, yeah.
That's class. But even in that, it's like, there's this, I just love that sentiment, because so many aspects of the modern, of our zeitgeist at the moment, there's not enough of a recognition of the shadow. There's not enough of a recognition of the human condition being a shared condition. That, like, there's a savage line by Montaigne where he says that every man bears the whole form of the human condition. That there's not enough of a recognition of the potential for chaos, malevolence, destruction, hatred, greed, envy, all those things within every person, regardless of identity characteristics, sexual preference, regardless of their skin color, regardless of all this. There's this focus on identity characteristic, a focus on out-group projection that's so toxic. It's blaming the other for your stress, blaming the other our stress. And whereas what's so appealing to me about Jung, about Nietzsche, about these aspects of Buddhism and Stoicism that demand confronting the entirety of the human condition, with warts and all, is that by recognizing the parts of ourselves that we wish didn't exist, and by coming to terms with their existence, and by learning how to navigate them, that we then, first of all, are less likely to actually manifest out those negative aspects of ourselves in the world. And secondly, by recognizing our own flaws and fallibilities as these temporarily assembled clusters of borrowed stardust that's happened to reach some level of organic complexity, to facilitate some kind of a conscious self-awareness that we can recognize. By recognizing our own flaws and fallibilities, can then recognize the goodness within people, even who we may despise the most. So then it's not to advocate passivity, and that terrorists shouldn't be stopped, or that people shouldn't be still, that there aren't bad things that need to be dealt with. It's just that it allows us to act from a place of compassion and a shared understanding of the human condition, rather than an assumption of automatic innocence because of some ingrained preference or some delusion that we have about our own heavenly angelic state. That, so that's why it's like Jung and Nietzsche, these aspects of Stoicism and Buddhism is in particular, just keep drawing me back because they acknowledge the entirety of the human condition in a way that is so invaluable in a world of kind of delusion and social media facilitated narcissism and self-focus and self-interest and atomism and fragmentation. So that's a kind of a mile high view of my overall take on this philosophical landscape and the ideas that interest me the most and why.
Yeah. I think that's great there. You talked about social media and narcissism. So that's a nice segue into, you can follow our work on www.learningtodie.com. We'll also have this up on a YouTube channel, Learning to Die, as well. We might put up even an old Twitter handle there and an Instagram. Now, we're all very busy with other stuff as well, so we'll be just using that to push out content and maybe do a little bit of interaction. But we will be setting up on the website some contact us links, so you can get in contact with myself or Ciaran and ask us any questions or give us some feedback on the episodes or even ask us to cover a particular topic. The challenge Ciaran and I are going to have now is, one is to research these episodes. We do a bit of research before we go into them. Two is we have about 500 episodes already that we've made a list of. Everything from Stoicism to the Old Testament to Buddhism, Taoism, the Book of Five Rings, Ernest Becker, Denial of Death, Montaigne. We had the Harry Potter series on that list. They're only the ones I can think of. A heap of Japanese samurai books. So there's loads we want to delve into, but we're always interested to hear what you might think. So check out the website there, get in contact with us, and let us know what you think. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, maybe share it around to your friends, to your own social media channels, or just send us a text or whatever you want to them. You can subscribe to there. We're up on Podbean as our hosting platform. We'll be pushing out there to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and whatever else will take us. So, the all usual there, lads. Leave us a review, and always happy to take some feedback as well. So, Ciaran, I think that's a good intro. And as people probably listen, Jesus Christ, that was a bit fucking rambling, wasn't it? That's the way we will be. We might ramble off on tangents. We were thinking about calling this podcast Tangents, but we thought Learning to Die actually was just better, because that's what we're trying to do. We're learning how to live a good life. So we have to focus on the death, but we're actually trying to optimize and take the marrow out of it every day. All right.
And there's a line by Montaigne, another one where it's actually an essay of his, but it's the name of the essay is to philosophize is to learn how to die.
Ooh, look at that. We'll end it on that one. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, every other person out there, whatever you identify with, hope you're enjoying the podcast. That was our introduction. Subscribe and listen in for the first breakdown that's coming up soon. Thanks, Ciaran.
No worries. Thanks, man.